finally, we wanted to take a look at probation, sentences to probation. In New York City, the rate of sentence to probation is very low overall and has not changed significantly over the 10-year period, 4% in 2014 to about 2% in 2023. When we look at sentences to probation outside New York City, we see more variation here, with white defendants more likely to be sentenced to probation than Hispanic defendants or Black defendants. So while sentences to incarceration are similar, it's the non-incarcerative sentences where we see more variation across race and ethnicity outside New York City. One of the things that we've seen in these presentations looking at differences in race and ethnicity is that, you know, in most cases, a lot of the times, looking at individual outcomes, we don't see the disparities in the individual outcomes. It's really at the very front end of the system, who's getting arrested, how often they're getting arrested, who's coming in the front door of the justice system, where we see those biggest variations across race and ethnicity.
Okay, my job is to try to crystallize a few themes in the data, and then add a little bit more data, and then talk about measurement issues, and be done with all of that in 5 minutes. So by the way, Kellyanne, feel free to raise your hand when I'm at 4, and I will be quick. Crystallizing themes. There is disproportionate Black and Hispanic contact with the legal system nationally, and in New York City and New York State, number 1. Number 2, and we saw this in some of Lee's slides, and we'll see it in some of mine, the data points to greater Black-white disparities than Hispanic-white disparities, but that is precisely why we need an event like this one that draws attention to the still consequential Hispanic disparities, and as I think Juan was saying earlier, make sure that we don't leave the unique circumstances of those disparities invisible. Number 3, in recent years, we've seen a shrinking of the criminal legal system nationally, and in New York, we're in a period of reform, and yet, on many metrics, disparities are widening. Okay, so the denominator is getting smaller. That's a positive step for the justice system, but the magnitude of disparities within our smaller denominator isn't changing. That's a fundamental problem. Finally, I want to talk about the unique challenges of measurement with Hispanic and Latino populations. 4 themes. All right, so I'm going to do a little bit more data, and this is going to serve to be illustrative of some of those themes. So we're going to start with New York City's jail population. What we're seeing on the slide, these are called rate ratios. Essentially, we're looking at the number of times the rate of Black in the blue or Hispanic in the orange jail incarceration is higher than white people. So we're seeing significant disparities. We're seeing it's higher Black-white than Hispanic-white, and we're seeing incrementally it's grown a little bit higher over recent years, those themes that we just discussed. Okay, now we're focusing just on Hispanic-white disparities. So here we're seeing it, each trend line is for a different borough, large boroughs of New York City. Sorry, Staten Island, you missed the slide. What we're seeing here is that there's variability across boroughs. In Manhattan, we have far larger disparities in the jail incarceration of Hispanic as opposed to white people than any other borough. But we can dig even deeper on disparities at the neighborhood level as opposed to individuals. And so what we're seeing here is a map of New York City, but again, sorry, Staten Island, only so much space. And if we look at the upper part, we're looking at the Bronx, which is predominantly Hispanic. And what we're essentially looking at, if you look at the colors, is that we have disproportionate jail incarceration within the Bronx. And in fact, on a city level, what we found in this study is that residents of just 40 out of 178 New York City zip codes account for 60% of jail admissions. and in 36 of those 40 zip codes were majority Black or Hispanic. And the bottom of the slide gives some illustrations of some of the neighborhoods that are especially impacted. So jail and prison incarceration are at the most, let's say, severe end of the criminal contact spectrum. I want to go to, let's say, the light end of the contact spectrum, such as pedestrian stops, like stop, question, frisk. So again, on the left, we're seeing significant reductions in stop, question, and frisk in recent years. But on the right, we're seeing that theme we talked about earlier, that relative racial disparities are rising. Here we're seeing summonses. Okay, so that's a light touch contact. And again, in recent years, we're seeing significant disparities. We're seeing a modest increase. And parenthetically, when you get to civil summonses, the most common of which is being in public with an open container of alcohol, here we actually see the disparities impacting Hispanic people are greater than the disparities impacting Black people. All right, I want to finish with some measurement issues that are unique to Hispanic and Latino populations. How do we get data on these populations? Are they assigned by police or other criminal justice agents because they're looking at people and making a decision? Or are people being asked how they identify? Clearly, we would like the latter, but that's not always the case. What's the race of Hispanic or Latino people? It could be white, it could be Black. Data often categorizes it as quote unquote other. Is that okay? For researchers, this is less about data collection and more for people like me and Lee who are researchers. We like 4 categories. So we like one measure where we have Black, Hispanic, white, Asian, and then we group other groups together because the numbers are too small. But when we do that, we're occluding the intersections, right? We're occluding Black Hispanic, we're occluding white Hispanic when we reduce Hispanic to just one group. Finally, just to illustrate, just to bring these problems together, I want to cite a few statistics from an older study using 2017 data. This is just illustrative, not that these problems are still true today, but illustrative. In New York, we have a place called the New York City Criminal Justice Agency. They classify people's race and ethnicity, and then we have NYPD, they do the same. So in this study, when CJA classified people as Hispanic white, NYPD did the same just 82% of the time. When CJA classified people as Hispanic Black, NYPD did the same only half of the time, 54% of the time. When CJA classified people as Hispanic other, NYPD didn't have that category, so they said the individual was Hispanic white, 3/4 of the time Hispanic Black, 19%. When NYPD classified people as Hispanic Black, if that same person had a subsequent case, people got classified differently 54% of the time in that second case. So just finally, going to measurement issues, you can see in these different classifications of the same individuals some of the problems we face in our data collection and our research. And so, Krista, with that, I'm handing it right back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Mike. You are nothing if not efficient. I appreciate that. I want to get to audience Q&A, and I'm going to ask that the folks in the room who are collecting cards, if you can sort of scan the audience, see if there's anyone. We have Lisian over here at this end. We have Anna over here at this end who are helping to collect those. But in the meantime, I'd actually like to direct a question to Huang. You mentioned, and I think we've talked about, I mean, there's so much of what the comments that were made, including Mike looking at like this concentration within neighborhoods that are literally feeding our jail admission rates. Like we can clearly point to Hispanic and Black dominated neighborhoods that are tracking to our jail population. And something that we highlighted earlier was the fact of how we've handled and treated issues of substance use and addiction. And so for you, Juan, now we're at a time where we're seeing what I'll call a growing awareness of how drug addictions could be treated within public health spaces, within the healthcare system. And also Commissioner Rosado mentioned how even that is racialized. And I'm wondering, can you discuss what the implications of that, have been within Latino communities and Black and Brown communities generally, and then what that should mean for individuals impacted by these long-standing draconian drug laws?
So I think Commissioner Rosado referred to this very recently in her remarks just today, and the fact of the matter is that we're looking at a different treatment modality when it comes to addiction in the United States, and especially in places in New York City. And that different treatment is way, 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 way overdue, because it's not what I remembered when my cousin was hooked on heroin in the 1970s. And then he took methadone for decades. Now, he was a junkie. His moral failure was the reason he got addicted to heroin. Not that he had an injury that resulted in being prescribed a painkiller like Oxy that then ran out, and then he started using heroin. So, wow, he was just caught up in the craziness of Big Pharma. Or not that he, developed an addiction to painkillers because he raided his mother's medicine cabinet and now is stuck with the reality of using heroin because it's hard to find or purchase Oxy. You see, now we're talking about these individuals not because they have moral failures, but because they either were in the wrong crowd or that they just got stuck in a system in which now we're recognizing what OxyContin was doing to market itself as a white drug mostly for white folk, and a way to try to get that done in a way that results in this opioid crisis that we have today. But the opioid crisis that we have today is only dwarfed by one other. In the 19th century, heroin was marketed as a drug. Bayer made heroin and sold it with a capital H. Most morphine and heroin was prescribed by doctors. So doctor-assisted use of opioids in the 19th century, we're talking about the 1800s, and into the 1900s as well, was marketed particularly for white populations. The far plurality of users of these substances, because they got it from their doctors. The ratio was 2-to-1 women to men. Middle class. No distinction between rural and urban. So what caused heroin to then be associated with Latinidad and blackness? And then what caused now the heroin opioid crisis to be reclassified almost again as a white issue? And I think there's where we are. So I want to end with this. The most amazing statistic that I'm now reading about, and by the way, the book is called White Out. It's written by excellent policy folk over at Drug Policy Alliance, and I'm happy to be on their board, and I really ask you if you want to learn more about these racial disparities, read the book. But right now, the way buprenorphine is being used and prescribed is also racialized. You see, methadone was seen as something that was, barely tolerated. It was like marketed and being used as methadone by individuals, mostly in Black and brown communities. Laws were passed so that the person prescribing the methadone in the methadone clinic had to make sure that it was actually taken, that they visibly see the person take it and swallow it. Buprenorphine is being prescribed by doctors. It's being prescribed in a completely different setting. And the makers of buprenorphine have convinced now federal drug policies to actually allow it to be prescribed for maintenance purposes. See, methadone was considered prescribed in a drug-free environment. We prescribe you this because at the end of the day, we have to be drug-free. Your addiction can eventually get off of drugs, and that's the solution. Now the marketing of these drugs are for maintenance. we can control by prescribing you other forms of opiates in a way that allows you to continue your addiction, but in a more sane and more methodical way. It is no secret and it's no accident that these drugs are being marketed and prescribed at rates that are higher in white communities in New York City, New York State, and the US than they are in our communities of Latinos, Latinas, and African Americans. So let's watch out and keep attention to what we're doing for the prescription of the solution to the addiction problem that we now have.
Thank you. Thank you for responding to that. And I want to be clear, some of the, sorry. Some of what we're talking about in terms of the rates of incarceration, the rates of arrest, as well as the rates of summons and how they're distributed, goes back to a point that Ana made during her first opening remarks, and it was that, we talk about behavior versus humanity, right? And there are discretionary choices made all along the criminal legal system that cause certain people to be wrapped up into the system, much like exactly the answer that Huang just shared with us, how there's a racialization of these policies that ultimately impact and yield the results that we're seeing within the criminal legal system. So I just wanted to highlight that, and like maintenance versus the criminalization or the push towards abstinence. And we also see a concentration of law enforcement within certain neighborhoods. And we have a ton of great questions and limited time. So I'm going to try to get to one, and I'm going to direct it to all of you and see if, so please tell me who would be, if you'd like to chime in. What do we know about what the NYPD has said about the data that yield these racial disparities? And what, if any, recommendations would you make or have been made to those who are in positions of authority or policy makings to reduce these disparities?
I mean, a lot of things have been tried, because it's all, no pun intended, well, pun intended, maybe tinted by the whole issue for Latinos of the colorism and the mere definition of race. I mean, I'm not sure exactly, but Mike and Lee, maybe you guys have a better, from at least a research point of view, what could be done about standardizing this. We had these categories at probation also, Black Latino, White Latino, and it doesn't make sense to me, but.
But maybe not that quickly. Well, a million years ago, when I was studying in Chicago, there was a professor who was one of the most distinguished professors in the university, William Julius Wilson. He wrote a very well-known book called The Declining Significance of Race. If you look at his later work, his views changed. His views at the time were that we should have universal solutions, and that the effect of universal solutions would be to address racial injustice. Over time, his views changed, and I think the data supports that that doesn't work. So your question was, what do we do about NYPD practices? I think part of the answer has to be not to be oblivious to race and ethnicity. If you know that deploying in certain neighborhoods is going to reduce disparities, that should actually affect your deployment when we're talking about things like criminal summons, for example, or pedestrian stops, for example. And so that's just a single example, but my general point is that we should start to be purposeful about analyzing the likely disparate effects of our policies and alter the policies if there will be likely disparate effects, which I think cuts against this older tradition that everything should be universal.
Yeah, and that goes to this continued study, right, to see what is going on, continued analysis, and pointing to a point that Commissioner Rosado made earlier. We have a lot of great questions, and I'm trying to figure out where to go first, because some of what's coming up in the questions is a lot around labels, a point that President Mason made earlier today, and the labels that we use in order to be both inclusive, right? So they're pretty broad to capture different gender identities, different cultures, different countries, even different languages and dialects within a very broad label. And the other thing is that we want to make sure that it is yet specific enough so we know who we're talking about, because each of these populations present their own challenges, their own needs, their own just specificities, right? And I want to get to more of the questions here. So, and if you can answer this, and I feel like maybe it's more on the research side, does the disparity in incarceration rates correlate to the disparity in demographic of the judiciary for the respective regions? Would you opine as to whether the disparities in the judicial system contribute to incarceration disparities? And I don't know if we can, I don't think anything so refined has been done, but is there something to say, I guess, about folks from these communities also being in these positions to make these crucial decision-making?
I would say one of the things that we have seen in previous analyses is that it's not so much, again, that the decision made in an individual case shows disparity. It's really the criminal history of the person themselves that matters a lot. It's having that first felony conviction that can really send somebody down a very different path. So if somebody is more likely to be arrested because of the neighborhood they live in, because of the color of their skin, if they're more likely to be arrested more often because of the neighborhood they live in or the color of their skin, it's that, again, systemic disparity that really seriously impacts people even more than what happens on an individual case, whether that individual case is convicted or whether they're sentenced to prison. It's the culmination of all of these experiences over time.
You know, real quickly, yeah, definitely it is. It's like the color of your skin and where you live. Because it's not correlated so much to the race of the people in the judiciary, if that was part of the question, because the judiciary's race is going to reflect the race of lawyers in New York State. And lawyers are disproportionately white in New York State, just like they are throughout the country. In New York State, you get to elect some of your judges, so you might have an uptick, so to speak, in the number of black and Latino judges, but that's it. And then to get to that's why I love this question. We presumed a long time ago, we meaning Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, that when it brought a bunch of lawsuits to integrate the uniformed services in New York City, the number of police officers, sergeants, and lieutenants, and it brought major lawsuits to knock down the barriers that made employment discrimination obvious, right? People were being graded on test exams that had nothing to do with performance as a police officer or as a sergeant or as a lieutenant. And along with the NYC Fund, NWSP Legal Defense Fund, Puerto Rican Legal brought a bunch of lawsuits, including lawsuits to challenge the height requirements to become a police officer in New York State and New York City. A lot of that is because these are damn good jobs with pensions. And black and brown folk want to have those jobs. But the underlying thing that hardly people that Barrio talked about is we expected a police force that's more black and brown to be a different police force.
That in and of itself is not going to do it. And I think you're right, that we all had the expectation that, you know, we can relate to the people we're serving and therefore we could, get better outcomes, and that has not panned out to be the case. I do want to say, I mean, I may need to park this because this is a much bigger conversation. I think that we, in talking about all these issues, often give a pass, and I always kick myself when I give them a pass too, to the education system. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that in case there's a question, but if not, I think we need to tackle that at some point.
I just want to reiterate, while we get a mic out to Stan Hamad, who I think wants to make a comment or ask a question, I want to just reiterate for the folks in the Zoom audience or others in the room, Commissioner Rosado just raised the point that oftentimes there's studies that have shown nationwide that judges will more often remand people of Hispanic descent or origin because of this feigned belief that they have a home in their home country. And I think that's despite how many years it's been since they've been there, whether they've been born there or not, I believe is the case. So, Stan, can I pass to you?
Sure. I'm Stan Hedemon. I'm the Executive Director of New York County Defender Services. I want to change topics a bit. Deputy Commissioner Bates, one of your slides showed a significant drop after 2020 of felony arrests relative to felony convictions. And it seems that felony convictions have gone down steadily since 2020. And I just wonder if you have thoughts about what we can attribute that to.
Right, so the slides are showing the felony arrests came down in 2020 and then have gone back up again, and felony convictions have come down as well. There are a lot of reforms, as many of you know, that happened at the same time as the pandemic. So it's hard to identify a single reason for that the convictions are coming down. I would imagine it's probably a lot of those together. It's the pandemic and the courts slowing down a little bit. It's also some of the reforms or, results of some of the reforms that were put into place, including pretrial reform, discovery reform, and others.
Thank you. This has been very enlightening so far, and I'm just so glad that I'm here. I'm a former public defender, and I work now supervising attorneys who are criminal defense attorneys who take private cases for the poor in New York City. My question is actually towards the comment that you just made, which is a bigger issue regarding education, and I know we said that we would park it, but what I'm going to ask the panel is, has anybody considered the idea of disrupting the school to prison pipeline, and perhaps, because I see that there are moves towards kind of after the fact things happening, bringing up people's backgrounds in terms of IEPs and disabilities that people may have that have kind of led them down the wrong path for the people who have wound up incarcerated. Has there been any sort of focus on, by the system, to get into the schools more quickly to identify issues that may disrupt this path for certain individuals?
Yeah, I'll take that, because yes, there have been. Have they been effective? Not necessarily. And when you look at Welly, in one of her slides, or Michael, the neighborhoods, right, where there's the high concentration of both incarceration and Latino population, et cetera, what we have not done is then let's invest and go into those schools, because when you look, so not every young person who's missing school ends up in the system, granted, but they end up disconnected in some way, okay? Now, when we look at the young people who are in the system, when we look back, we do see almost one-to-one correlation with school, quote-unquote, failure. And these are the people who are supposed to be experts in child development and so on and so forth. I digress. But there's also, I think, parallel to the issue of convictions affecting voting rights, we also have convictions affecting education rights. And you're, again, stripping you of your humanity. A human being has a right to develop their brain, as far as I'm concerned. I think people will agree. But we take that away from them when we put them in our cages, And it has been demonstrated, actually, that education, while somebody's incarcerated, or let me put it this way, improves reconnection to community once that individual comes back. And so it's ridiculous that we're not investing in that we're not investing in the communities with the highest toxic trauma, and that's all the systems, all those 40 neighborhoods, I bet you have the worst indicators of poverty, education, employment, and everything else, right? But we want to, that's the difference between equity and equality. But we want to give money to everybody. So neighborhoods that are functioning better, AKA higher populations of, perhaps white and or more affluent neighborhoods, then do better. That I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, Commissioner Bates, the data you presented that has Hispanic as the category, is that non-Black, non-white Hispanic, or I'm just a little confused by the categorization.
Sure. I very much appreciated the comments earlier about how to measure race and ethnicity. And I forget who said it, but I think part of the consideration in measuring race and ethnicity is the purpose for which you are measuring it. For the data coming into DCJS, it's collected, at the point of arrest when a person's being fingerprinted. It is for the purpose of being able to identify that person. It's not, for the purpose of understanding policy-wise what's happening with disparities. The way that we collect it, the way that we code it, is we get race and ethnicity as two separate variables, and then we create a hierarchy. So if a person is reported to be Hispanic, they are coded as Hispanic. Even if they are Black Hispanic, even if they're Asian Hispanic, they're coded as Hispanic as the hierarchy. By definition, then, Black is Black non-Hispanic, white is white non-Hispanic, et cetera.
We are at time. This has been such a rich discussion. I'm so elated to be on a panel with you all. I'm so glad that you are here to share your thoughts and for the engagement of the folks who are at home and the folks who are here in the room. I want to say we're going to move into a brief break.
One morning, somebody that I have tremendous respect for and have been talking to for some time, we said we had to meet for breakfast to talk about some work, right? So we met for breakfast down here, a couple of blocks here somewhere. Happened to see Mayor de Blasio in his shorts, had been running that day, right, sitting there eating breakfast too. And when we were talking, they said to me, Andre, we have to do something for Latinos. And I said, okay, all right. And I said, you know what, we're gonna do something. And so when we talked about that, I ran quickly to Krista Rodriguez, right, at DCJ, and Mike, where's Mike at? Mike Rankin, where's Mike, he left? And Mike, right, to the team in DCJ, and said, we have to do something, right? And then, who do you call to want to do something? Commissioner Rosado. We said, we call the commissioner, we got to call a commissioner about this. And as soon as that happened, commissioner, right away, this is happening, we're doing this. The instructions we get. Hence the reason why we're here too. I want to acknowledge Zenaida Menendez from MNN Studios, who's here, who started that conversation, and is why we're here. So I want to acknowledge her too, give her a long round of applause. And now I'll turn it over to my dear colleague, Ashley Rodriguez. Ashley, here.
Thank you, Andre, for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to ask my esteemed panelists to please join me. So while these lovely folks are joining me, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we'll be discussing during this panel. And so we'll be looking at understanding the true criminal justice impacts for Latinx communities. We'll be looking at how arrest can lead to severe immigration consequences and discuss the criminalization of migration. Look at public and media narratives regarding Latinx people and migrant communities. And lastly, we'll be discussing the broad range impact of criminal justice involvement on Latinx families and their communities. So I'd like to welcome my panelists and introduce them. So going down from this way, we have Talia Peleg, who is the co-director of Immigrant and Non-Citizen Rights Clinic at the CUNY School of Law. Next, we have Zenaida, who is the director of the Manhattan Neighborhood Network at Barrio Firehouse Community Media Center. And lastly, Ismael Diaz, who is the downstate community organizer for the Center for Community Alternatives. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So Talia, I'd like to actually start with you. Given criminal convictions have a direct impact on a person's ability to achieve legal status or adjust to a more permanent legal immigration status in the United States, can you describe for us how arrest on the criminal legal system more broadly can have an immediate impact on non-citizens even prior to any conviction?
Thank you so much. And it's just really wonderful to be here. And I really want to just start, I'll promise I'll answer the question, but really quickly, just to thank Juan Cartagena for his comments. It's really wonderful to be in a space where we're talking about criminal justice issues and immigration issues together and how interrelated they are and how important it is. I know many people here probably work in the criminal legal space and reform space, and you're very well aware of so many of the issues and problems in that system. And I really hope, as an immigration attorney and professor here with you today, that I can really shed some light on how those problems are infecting the immigration system, which obviously is deeply important to Latinx communities and their ability to live, remain, work, and thrive in the United States. So I really hope I can bring some of that perspective. So thank you, and it's really wonderful to be in this discussion. I just wanted to, sorry, Professor, you can't give me the mic without a little thank you to start. So in terms of the question of how arrest alone can impact non-citizens, there's multiple ways. And the first that's really important, I think, to understand is that conduct alone, like we heard in the last panel, can be used to deny someone immigration benefits. There's no need for a conviction. An arrest that results in a dismissal can and is often used to, for example, block someone from getting a green card. Secondly, even when cases are dismissed, nothing comes of them in criminal court, they're completely and utterly dismissed. Immigration is so discretionary that these arrests come up, they're looked at by judges, and everything you might imagine in terms of safeguards and evidence from the criminal justice system, which I know is deeply flawed, is even more flawed in the immigration system. What can come in? And these arrests come up and haunt non-citizens throughout their immigration proceedings as well. But the even more important area, I think, to talk about where arrests come in to immigration is the issue of detection, right? There's no bigger issue that we're hearing now of, and that literally means detection by immigration, by ICE, which can lead to, as many of you know, periods of detention, which are immigrant jails throughout the country. The conditions are the exact same as they're often within criminal jails in space that ICE rents, where people can be sent anywhere in their country while they're fighting their immigration case, despite this being a civil system, and ultimately could lead to deportation. So this detection issue is really important to understand. And for the last 30 years, since 1996, the immigration system has basically used the criminal justice system as a way to enforce immigration laws. So both by incorporating criminal justice context into what can make someone deportable, but also looking to spaces where people come into contact with the criminal justice system, like we heard about, over police neighborhoods, the police, local jails, even well before someone may in fact be convicted, those spaces are being utilized and looked at by ICE to target non-citizens for deportation. So the last point I just want to say on this is that many people are still not aware that, if someone is in criminal custody and they have bail and bail is paid, someone could be transferred to immigration and face this host of consequences that I just said, despite not having any record or conviction. And I want to say that this is an issue, there's so much misinformation, to say the least, when it comes to immigration right now. It's really enraging. But even in jurisdictions that are sanctuary jurisdictions that we think of as trying to protect immigrants, such as here in New York City, where there's some laws that are designed to help to suggest that local law enforcement not collaborate with ICE. Even in jurisdictions like this, there still is very much of a collaboration. There's a big exception when the NYPD and the Department of Correction can, in fact, collaborate with ICE. And the mayor is currently threatening to revoke these laws that were passed in 2014 by a coalition of many, many directly impacted individuals and attorneys to try to stop some of this collaboration. So even in jurisdictions that are viewed as sort of sanctuary jurisdictions, there is still an immense amount of collaboration where someone merely enters the criminal legal system with an arrest or summons, and this collaboration continues. And it's very much under threat here in New York City with the current mayor and who knows in the next administration. So it's something that we really need to be paying attention to.
Talia, I'd like to talk a little bit about those migrating or crossing the south border that have been receiving heightened attention and have been highly politicized, particularly during this election. And the southern border state governors physically transporting migrants led by Democrats have also received a lot of attention. But could you discuss some of the ways migration has been criminalized over recent years, including involving local law enforcement to take on roles officially held by federal law enforcement agencies? And how does this criminalization present barriers to immigrants seeking legal status in the U.S.?
Sure. So the Immigration and Nationality Act also enshrines within it, as of 1996, when all of these laws were really, really changed and radicalized, I would say, there's a provision called 287G, which allows for ICE to deputize local sheriffs, local jurisdictions, local law enforcement to essentially hold people for immigration purposes. During the Obama administration, mostly somewhat into the Bush, from 2006 to 2015, these agreements were extremely widespread, and that's how most individuals ended up being deported, through this contact at a local level being funneled into the deportation pipeline. That provision is still under the law where this deputization is happening. There's 60 counties that are in agreements, including Rensselaer County in New York State, where the sheriff is in this kind of arrangement with ICE. We're going to hear later from other speakers on how dangerous this is, but you can imagine, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with and remember Sheriff Arpaio in Arizona, who used this agreement to literally, round up hundreds of thousands of Latinos to arrest them for suspected immigration violations. And so there's one provision enshrined already in the immigration law that allows for this deputization. But what we're seeing now is even more extreme, and I think something we really need to be aware of. There's legislation pending in Texas called SB4 that was you may remember, brought to the Supreme Court last term. It's been enjoined, so it's not in effect, but it's extremely dangerous, and there are copycat bills throughout the country. This is state law, okay? So this is a provision in Texas to allow local law enforcement to create a crime locally for being present without authorization, meaning being undocumented. That in and of itself is a crime. And the other provision that's extremely troubling in that law is that it gives local agents the power to physically deport people to the border with Mexico. So this is, again, we're seeing efforts of states trying to enact immigration enforcement. There's a lot of federalism issues for the lawyers here. Like, obviously, this is a big, this is being contested. This is being litigated right now in the Fifth Circuit, but Iowa has a very similar provision that's deeply disturbing that allows for the arrest of even non-citizens who may have asylum or maybe green card holders. So as we're thinking broadly, and not to mention, of course, the deeply problematic racial profiling consequences that would come from a provision like this, even beyond what we've already seen. So there is a very real effort to allow local agents to engage in immigration enforcement in very dangerous ways. Sorry, there's one other thing I just wanted to add. In addition to this, something else that Juan had said that I think is important. So illegal entry and illegal re-entry, 1325 and 1326, were the #1 prosecuted federal crimes in the United States for many, many years. And sort of that image that Juan set up where people were literally being prosecuted in a room like this within 3 seconds. And so that, I really want to emphasize, that's another way that the criminalization of migrants is happening. But I also just wanted to say that I took a group of students to the border in May, a week before the asylum ban was even further fortified by Biden. But already the border had been very, very shut down, and it was very, very difficult to come and ask for asylum. But there were other phenomenon emerging that we were seeing. And again, this is anecdotally from interviews with clients I did in Ciudad Juarez and in El Paso. But there's an increase of non-citizens coming in and being prosecuted with assaulting a CBP officer, a federal officer on the federal level, being convicted, serving months, 7, 8 months in federal custody, and then being deported. So now they have a criminal record. They're affecting their ability to request asylum and to pursue their rights. And just as we think about what's happening, people are spending the amount of money that is going into holding people in federal jails for these crimes and deporting them is deeply troubling. And I even met with a client who was driving in the El Paso area with several friends who was arrested and convicted of quote unquote alien smuggling, and as offensive as that is, but that's what it's called in the statute, for driving with individuals who were his friends. So we're seeing the sort of use of these federal laws to further criminalize migrants, and then that has the impact of harming them from being able to receive immigration status. So there's really this interplay that's deeply troubling.
Thank you, Talia. Ismail, I'd like to turn it over to you. Given what Talia has shared about local law enforcement adopting policies intended to target immigrants, how might this contribute to the potential risk for racial bias in police stops of even U.S. citizens, particularly Latinx people? And what does this do for perceptions of systemic justice or injustice and ultimately impact issues of safety?
So when law enforcement starts to target Latinx community and immigrants, it starts to cause a racial bias, and the things that they put in place become racial profiling, just pulling people over because they think they're illegal or they're immigrants, and then they increase the stops and searches, whether you're an immigrant or you're a citizen, they're just pulling you over because of what they feel you look like. And then the perception of injustice, as a community, we start to see that they're pulling people over and they're profiling us and searching us, that we start to distrust the police. So once you start distrusting the police, it starts to become an issue of safety concern within the community, because now nobody's going to report a crime because they don't trust the police, and it trickles down and it causes a ripple effect across the whole community when you start letting people racially profile Latinx community.
Tonight, I'd like to turn it over to you, and moving more towards media and film, as well as serving an advocate for many years. Could you share from your perspective the themes that stand out from media narratives that you've been hearing, and how might that have a direct impact on Latinx communities, both others' perceptions of them and their perception of themselves?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Well, there's several things. I can tell immediately when I see a headline in the newspaper or on television, who is the accuser? Why? Because usually the person the camera community will cover is the one that is identified. Eunice Reyes, Garcia, so we know that is the accuser. Usually the person, the Anglo, is never identified. So you know that's the person committed the crime. But in the United States, even though we think we are a very democratic country, we happen to have a press and media that think they are the full power and they're part of the government. And basically, in this political arena that we're living today, is basically avoiding everyone say whatever they want. They accuse people without having any facts. And constantly, many people believe it. I'm particularly concerned about the Hispanic press. When we see Telemundo, when we see Univision, there is no information there. It's misinformation. And I'm very concerned about that. Usually it's all about the crime. We have many people doing so many great things in the United States and also in New York City. Why don't we profile that? So that is really, really concerned. And now we, Instagram and X and Facebook and everything else, everyone just says whatever they want. Okay? But the most important question that I want to ask you, why are we here? Why are people coming to the United States? Because of United States policy in our countries. That's why we're here. Why are we here today? Because in 1965, 40,000 U.S. Marines invaded the Dominican Republic. And my parents was able, they had to immigrate. So we have to ask, What happened on Sunday in Madison Square Garden? What was said about Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican? I mean, some don't even know the Puerto Rican are U.S. citizen. So what happened, why are Mexicans coming here, why people from Africa are coming here, why? We had to ask, nobody asked, nobody, except for Manhattan Neighborhood Network, WBAI. You can tune in every day, 8 a.m. in the morning. We go live with Democracy Now! With Juan Gonzalez and Amy Goodman. It's the only live television program, and we repeat it at 7 p.m. We have 7 television channels dedicated to the community. We give voice to the voiceless. Because in addition to everything that we do, we train community residents how to do your own television production. And we broadcast in 20 languages. So you can tell your people the information in your own language. This is important. This is very important. But I want to ask you, how many of you, your parents were born outside the United States? So when I hear kids saying, oh no, I'm an American. Okay, well, you were born here, but where are your parents from? This is important. This affects so many of us. And we have to start thinking how we can shift again the political policy of the United States. And as a Dominican, I have to tell you, the Dominican Republic owes so much money to the United States, to the International Bank, to the World Bank, that they can take the Dominican Republic anytime they want. They can just take it over like they did in 1916. What's happening in Haiti right now? So we have to start looking in the press, conspire, because we don't own the press. We don't own the press. And then, if the press is a commercial, then whoever buys the commercial, and that's why when I tell people, just boycott a product, you know? How can you sit from 6 a.m., 6 p.m. to midnight just watching novela? And then the 11 o'clock news is about how bad we are. What's happening in the Bronx, qué está pasando en el Barrio, is nothing beautiful about us. So we have to start questioning how we are portrayed by the media. And don't mind the paper. Call them, reply, and they all have the line and say, if you don't agree with what we said, call us back. Let me tell you, I do a segment every Wednesday at 8:15 in the morning, Levántate, New York. Last week, they got suspended and penalized by YouTube. Why? Last year, a year ago, someone mentioned something about vaccination and how people should not vaccinate. A year later, they got suspended from YouTube. And the reason was because of. So this is, the press is not free, there is no democracy, señores. There is no democracy. We have to be very attentive. I learned right here in John Jay, because I graduated from John Jay, and I had a great Arturo Sanchez, who's still alive, and Corona Queens. He was I love that professor. He said, the first thing usually is the byline. Who wrote the article? And you see the New York Times one day tell you an editorial or something, the next day the line is completely different, the policy completely different. So we have to question ourselves. And for the young people that are here, talk to your parents. Why are they here? What made they? You think that you're going to walk 3 months to cross the border with children? Oh, because you're going to the United States to get money? No. What's happening in this country is even worse. Policy of the United States on those countries.
Thank you, Zenaida. And given some of those harmful stereotypes that's portrayed in media, Zenaida, how do we better support the storytellers that come from marginalized communities? And what role do you think the public access television plays in shaping these narratives?
Definitely. You are all welcome to have a television program with us. No censorship. You come to an orientation once the first Saturday of the month, and we tell you how we operate. We also teach You can learn how to manage the studio, the camera, the editing. We have a summer program, even though I tell people, people think it's just for young people. If you are between 14 and 125, you are welcome at MNN. So basically, there are 5 public access stations in New York City. Brooklyn has 1 brick, Queens, QBO-TV, Bronx Net, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and Staten Island. It's the best secret in New York City. We have 7 television channels, depending on your cable television. You can tune us in. And you can see our program. We have a program with the Fortune Society for over 20 years. That's how I met Andre. And that's why I said to him, we need to do something about Latinx. I've also had the National Dominican Women's Caucus. And I have so many calls because I worked for Congressman Rango for 5 years. I worked with David Dincan when he was the mayor. So people still call me to do constituency services. So women have called me and said, oh my God, my son is going to be transferred to Buffalo. And I'm in New York City. How am I going to get to Buffalo? 7 hours in a bus. Then I have to sleep in a hotel. They don't have the means to get there. And we can stop that. If only the elected official have the guts to do what they need to do. All right? Because I tell people, oh, that person didn't kill anybody. Why is that person in jail? Why is that person in prison? He didn't kill anybody, or she didn't kill anybody. So the Fortune Society, as also Exodus, they done a great job, so many other organizations, to make sure that our family know their rights, and that our family knows there are ways that I can defend. But sometimes family call an elected official, they don't, oh no, that person is in prison. Immediately they think, I'm an Afro-Latina. Let me tell you, I drove from New York to California. Me and my partner, 2 Black women. So I said, no, you have to be very careful. By 7 o'clock, anywhere you are, you have to stop. 2 Black women driving cross country, you don't know what can happen. But that happened. Sometimes you leave your house in 104th Street. By the time you get to 110 and 3rd, there's 2 cops stopping you. And not only in a police car, but also on the cover. Sometimes the taxi behind you is an undercover cop. So how can you live that way? How can you live that way? So we need, I'm an activist. That's why I do what I do. Because I'm constantly, reminding people that we need to advocate for ourselves. We need to hold our elected officials accountable. And I'm glad the 2 of them are going to show up today, and they happen to be 2 women. So it's time for us to change the shift and bring women to power, because we care about the community as a whole. I'm sorry for the men that are here, but that's been proven. Okay, we're 51% of the population, and we give birth to the other 49%. We're in charge. So let's take the driving seat and do what we need to do. And like the attorney was saying here, the cases that issue or immigration attorney have are incredible. They fighting the fight in court because of this law, but the attorneys in Texas, there are many great organizations, they are doing a great job, but it's overwhelming. We need more attorneys, we need more people who know about the law, we need more legal services, because more people are going to come here. Why? We have about 10 wars going on, all sponsored by the United States. Where are the people going to go? Where are they going to go? They're coming here. So we have to think about that.